Today I'd like to talk to you about Mortal by Bella Lore, which is a young adult paranormal romance type book that's very reminiscent of like Wednesday or Vampire Academy. And unlike a lot of books marketed as YA nowadays, this book is actually appropriate for people in their late teens, maybe 14 or 15 plus. I can't speak to the rest of the book in the series because I've only read the first one, but this one at least is fine for people in their late teen years. Mortal follows a young woman named Winter, who is shipped off to a boarding school after the death of her last surviving relative, her father. And once she gets there, it becomes very quickly apparent that there is more to the school and its students than meets the eye. Winter is thrust into a world of magic and supernatural beings before she even has a chance to get settled. And I do want to do a quick content warning real quick. This is sort of a fish out of water, non-magical girl goes to a magical school sort of situation, and there are pretty graphic depictions of bullying in this book. And when I say graphic, I mean it's detailed, both the external things that are happening to her and her internal turmoil associated with this bullying. So if those sorts of depictions are really going to bother you, you might want to skip this book. There's also some sort of surface, or I would say probably reasonably shallow depictions of a teenager grieving for the recent loss of a parent. So again, if that's going to really bother you, you might want to skip this one. I'd also like to point out really quickly, in case you couldn't tell by my face, I am 42 years old. I am not the target audience for this book. These characters are high schoolers, and the book is written for a high school age or maybe college aged audience. I did do my level best to keep that in mind while I was reading it, and so it's possible that I was either a little too harsh or a little too forgiving on some of the aspects of the book, trying to be accommodating for the fact that this book just wasn't written for me. So I just wanted to point that out real quick, that my interpretation and what I got out of this book is going to be very different than somebody who read it that was in the appropriate age range. That being said, I did really enjoy it. Setting aside some of the like teenage characteristics that I had a hard time relating to, I really liked the story. I thought that it was fun. I thought the like very free open use of magic was fun. The characters were fine. They were interesting enough. The main character is a little mopey, but she just lost her dad. She's gonna be sad. It also contains a lot of the expected YA genre tropes, awkward girl, fish out of water sort of thing. Insta-love, conflict being driven by miscommunication or lack of communication, but all of those are pretty expected in a YA book, in particular YA romance. And I feel like complaining about expected genre tropes within the genre is really shallow, so I'm not going to do that here. There were also a lot of scenes that felt like they were ripped directly out of or mirrored directly from other properties within the YA romance subgenre. Things like the underwater fight scene was very reminiscent of the mermaid scene from the Triwizard Tournament in The Goblet of Fire, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. There was also a scene where the main love interest puts the main female character on his back and sort of like hops through a forest with her on his back. He's a vampire, by the way. And that was very Twilight to me. The thing is, the way that it was done was very intentional and very careful. There was enough supporting characterization and story around it to support the actions of the character. And then those reused or mirrored or copied, stolen, if you want to say, although I don't want to use that word because it's not what it was. It was almost an ode to or an allusion to things that you would already know. Almost as though they were borrowing the mental imagery and emotions so that they could evoke those feelings in you that you got when you were viewing the original content, and then use that emotional payoff that was already in you to further the story. It was almost like a very finessed fanfic, where you're already capitalizing on something that the audience knows really well, and you're using the emotional investment that they have in those characters and those scenes to sort of leverage that buy-in to spend later. I'm not going to call it subtle because it certainly wasn't, but it was done in a respectful, and I would argue, in my opinion, a pretty masterful way. That doesn't mean that I think that this book is perfect. There are certainly things in it that cannot be attributed to, oh, it's a YA romance. Things like, for example, there were some open subplots with a couple of the side characters, Gregory and Alice in particular, that felt like they sort of reached their climax and then were just left. It's entirely possible that those storylines will be continued later on in the series, but it is my strong preference when you have subplots that you sort of like bring it to a temporary conclusion, like some sort of tentative resolution so that you can put a pin in it or tie a little bow on it and pause on that story until you get to the next book in the series. This didn't really do that. Like I said, it felt like they sort of got to the climax, they got to the big payoff, and then it just stopped and waited for the next book in the series. So I didn't particularly like the way that that was done. I understand that when you know that you're writing a series book, that it's very easy to just sort of like leave everything hanging because, oh, I'll solve that in the next one. But it's just not the way that I prefer to see those sorts of things handled. There were also a lot of times when the characters' emotions or actions felt unwarranted or unfounded. So I'm not talking about the insta-love between the main character Winter and the love interest Alec. That actually, I feel like, is being set up for a sort of fated mate scenario that's going to come about later in the books. It was pretty clear that that was what was being telegraphed, so I don't really have a problem with the fact that it was like instant sparks or insta love. That didn't bother me. What did bother me was Heather, the bully's absolute, visceral, unchecked, murderous hatred for Winter. Winter comes in and Heather immediately starts picking on her, messing with her. And we're not talking like normal high school age bullying stuff, although that is occurring. Like, she and her friends actually try to kill Winter multiple times. And then, when I say actions that are unwarranted or don't make a lot of sense, Winter has a meeting with the dean the next day after the first time that Heather and her friends try to kill her. And she says nothing. She doesn't mention it. And I am all for like teenagers learning to solve their own problems and, you know, don't be a narc and snitches get stitches and all that. Yeah, sure, fine. Teach people not to be tattletales. Teach kids to like solve their own problems. Fine. Okay with that. When someone's trying to kill you, at that point you go get an adult, right? At that point you go get somebody in a position of authority who can actually do something about it. That's just flat dangerous. That's not somebody picking on you or hurting your feelings. That's somebody trying to kill you, and you need to get some help. And that sort of like mentality of withheld communication, or I won't call it miscommunication because it's just flat non-communicative. That mentality carries over. It's really leveraged quite a bit more than I would like to see. I understand that it is an expected part of the YA genre. I just really don't like it. So there's a scene where when Winter's bullies, Heather and her cronies, attack her in an alley in town. The thing is, Winter knows there are people all over the place. She has a friend literally just like right at the end of the alley outside of line of sight, who she was just trying to convince, like, she's not the bad guy. These people are really, they're hurting her. They're messing with her. They're starting it. All she had to do was open her mouth and cry out, and she just didn't. For no other reason than because the book's plot needed Alec to be the one to rescue her rather than Gregory. And I absolutely understand setting up a scene so that you can have a certain character be the hero. But this scenario in particular could have been just as easily accomplished if they had followed her into the woods as she's like walking back to the school and attacked her there, rather than putting her in this complete nonsensical situation where she's literally in the middle of a town and just doesn't cry for help when people would have come to help her. Put her in a scenario where that wouldn't work, where she does cry out and nobody comes, and it would have worked just as well. That's really my only major complaint about the book, the lack of logical actions or sort of contrived emotion in service of the plot. It felt like it just needed a little bit more effort, and it would have been beautiful. Everything else that was in this book that I didn't like or didn't resonate with me, I can chalk up to it just being YA and me just being too darn old. Things like the awkward giddiness of a girl getting her first kiss, and the sort of like fish out of water or out of her element, awkwardness or goofiness or social anxiety sort of stuff. Like all of that was just normal YA stuff. And I don't think it's fair to hold it against the book because I'm just not the target audience. And I think that that's a pretty important distinction to make. Anyway, that's all I've got for Mortal. It's very tropey, but not in a bad way. It does reuse or mirror a lot of other properties from the same subgenre, but again, not in a bad way. I really liked the characters. I liked the story. I thought it was really fun. It's not really my thing, so I'm probably not going to read the rest of them, but yeah, it was fine for what it was. That's all I've got on it. If you liked the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Use Patreon if you want to support me, and then come hang out in the Discord if you want to talk to me about books or writing or anything else. Thank you so much for watching. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you in the next one.